and welcome to our webinar highlighting the new building performance standards and building stock features that we have recently added to our Cost Effectiveness Explorer tool. My name is Misty Bruceri, and I'm the coordinator for the IOU's Local Energy Codes program. Our webinar today is brought to you by that program, and the program provides a range of technical support and other support activities to jurisdictions that wish to adopt a local energy related ordinance. We don't advocate, but we basically, gosh, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time talking this morning. Our primary program goal is to help you achieve your goals. So we don't have a particular goal for you, but we just help you adopt whatever policy you're interested in. I'm here today with the Cost Effectiveness Explorer developers, Eric Engelman, who's the founder of Policy Studio, and his product manager, Jasmine Krause, who will be our main presenters today. The Explorer is a tool that helps local governments translate some of the results from our studies and things like that into an actual local policy. And so we've been working on that and trying to improve that user experience. And one of the things we've done is add this new building stock data to the tool, as well as several ways that you can manipulate that data. So we're going to start off today with a few questions to kick things off. We'd like to kind of get a feel for what your specific interests are today and your experience with BPS and the Explorer so that we can help hone our focus for the webinar. So after that, Eric's going to provide an overview of the Explorer's features, the new BPS related features, and also the data sources that they use to populate this data. There's a bunch of different sources out there, and so Eric's going to give us a little bit of background on how they did this. Following Eric's presentation, Jasmine's going to do a live demonstration of the tool with some examples of how you might use this data. And during that time, I want to encourage everybody to ask questions. Please ask any questions that you like. We have about 25 folks on the call today, so it's a relatively small group. And really, we all learn best when we're trying to solve a puzzle or figure something out or something like that. So asking those questions is really helpful, not just for yourself, but for everybody else on the call too. So please go ahead and do that. Before I turn it over to Eric and Jasmine, I want to talk a little bit about BPS policies, building performance standard policies, and some of the initial considerations when you're thinking of adopting one. Okay, so what is a BPS policy? A BPS policy sets a performance goal and then requires building owners to reduce their energy use or perhaps their emissions or water usage by either a certain percentage or to a specific level on a pre-specified schedule. So over a certain number of years, you have to make some improvements to achieve that goal. These kind of policies typically target larger buildings, but the concept can actually be applied to smaller buildings and really even single-family homes. I've heard it said that Berkeley's Bezo ordinance is kind of akin to a BPS for single-family. So it's the same concept where you set a performance goal and folks have to meet it. Okay, so BPS can be a really effective way to improve the efficiency and reduce emissions across your entire building stock. However, adopting and really most especially implementing a BPS policy is a significant undertaking. It's not like our typical REACH codes. With our typical REACH codes, there's already infrastructure and a process in place, and we're simply adding just an incremental activity on top of that existing infrastructure. With a BPS policy, there is a significant upfront investment to establish a whole new infrastructure to support that policy. And then you have to have some ongoing resources to keep implementing it. So it's a little bit of a different consideration than some of our other REACH codes. So there's a lot of folks out there providing information, and we're hoping that we can help with one place that we've heard that is an existing gap now, which is understanding that building stock. Okay, and so what we found is that if you're considering a BPS, it's actually really helpful to start with a benchmarking policy first. Benchmarking is basically the process of measuring and reporting energy and or water use data, and then tracking that performance relative to some established metric or standard. You want to just see how your building compares to others similar buildings. As I'm sure many, if not all of you already know, the CEC has a benchmarking program, and that requires all non-residential and some multifamily buildings as well that are larger than 50,000 square feet to report their energy and water use data using the Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool. In the Portfolio Manager, you report all your data, and then the building receives a score from 1 to 100.
I
That is an
apologize,
indicator.
Misty. I'm worried you can't see the chat. There's a couple questions of, do you believe you are advancing slides? Because we are still looking at the agenda.
Yeah, no, I am not, but
Okay,
thank you for interrupting there. I appreciate that. I am not. I was just talking right now.
great. Forgive me.
No, please. I appreciate it. And thank you. You're right. I had not been monitoring that. So thanks for that. I don't have any slides. I'm just talking a little bit about the process. I know folks often depend on slides, but I just didn't have any this morning. I thought we could just talk through this. Okay. Anyway, so the portfolio manager gives you a score from 0 to 100. And it gives you an indicator of how your building is performing relative to other similar buildings. And it does some normalization and things like that. There's all kinds of things that you can explore about Portfolio Manager. But basically, a couple of things, basic things to know is that if your building gets a score of at least 75 points out of that 100, or I guess we could say it another way, if it performs in the top 25% of buildings that are similar to yours, you could also be eligible to get an Energy Star certification. And so that would basically give you the plaque and all that kind of stuff you could put on the building. In many cases, that also exempts you from having to do too many things in the building performance standards because you're already certified as a high performance building. Okay, so the CEC allows local governments to adopt benchmarking policies. There are actually 7 local governments that have benchmarking policies in the state. And the policies are listed here on the CEC's website, along with a whole bunch of other resources about both the CEC program and also resources that would support a local benchmarking program. Benchmarking really allows you to kind of prepare for a BPS policy, gives you a chance to establish and refine that internal infrastructure and to establish communications with your building owners. This is something that, like many things in life, I think, those things that seem very simple on the surface often present some pretty significant challenges. And what some of our early BPS implementers have found out is that it actually takes a really significant effort to establish contact with the building owners in your jurisdiction and get them to communicate with you. It may take several attempts to even locate the right person when you're first reaching out to folks. So having a benchmarking program in place where you're not really requiring any actions or any significant investments at the beginning really is helpful in establishing that contact with all the building owners. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind that seems like a pretty straightforward step, but actually takes quite a bit of effort. But anyway, by doing benchmarking, it allows you to get that experience and to get the communications established, get your infrastructure in place and all that experience, and then also establish a good baseline from which you can actually measure the impacts once your BPS policy becomes effective. Okay, so as I'm sure you've all experienced already, setting up a BPS policy can be a little bit daunting, a little bit intimidating. There's a whole lot of things to think about and a lot that is a lot of uncertainty still. And so one of the first steps in that process, though, is to start becoming familiar with the building stock in your jurisdiction. To start asking the big questions. What are the major occupancy types in our jurisdiction? What's the typical age, the typical size? What's the potential savings? Is it worth the effort to go through this to actually, are the impacts going to be worth it for us? And so this is where our Explorer, BPS, and building stock tool comes into the picture. It helps you to begin to do that analysis, to start answering some of those questions so that you can make those initial decisions about if you'd like to develop a policy, and then what those features might be. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Eric to talk a little bit about the Explorer and the new BPS features that we have installed there. Eric?
Excellent. Thank you, Misty. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. All right. So before we begin, I'm Eric Engelman from Policy Studio, and Jasmine Kraus is here from Policy Studio as well, and really excited to talk to you guys today about our BPS feature, which we've been working hard on in various phases since the beginning of the year. And we started the Explorer out of the recognition that what we all do is really complicated. It requires, well, it doesn't require, but having good data at your fingertips makes the process a lot easier. And that is even more true for building performance standards than other kinds of energy policies. So getting to work on trying to give cities and counties tools to help with building performance standards has been a real challenge and a real pleasure, and it's an honor to present to you today. Let me get my, so you guys can see my screen, right? Misty, can you give me a thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay, great.
We can see.
All right, so I'm going to pop in the chat a quick survey, and I think this will help us all. You can click that link and answer a couple questions that will help us kind of understand where you guys are at, who's on the call, and sort of calibrate the rest of our presentation. So please take a couple minutes just to respond to that.
And that link is in the chat too.
Yeah.
Eric, sorry for interrupting. I do want to just make sure I just was reminded that I have forgot to let everybody know that we are recording the webinar today. And so the recording has already started. Just want to make sure everybody is aware of that.
All right, thank you. I see the responses streaming in. I'll give us maybe 30 more seconds. Okay, great. So we have 52% of you who work for a local jurisdiction, and about another 30% there who support or consult with one. And in terms of where you guys are in your BPS journey, it looks like 40% of you are currently considering a BPS but are not actively developing, and about 33% are currently developing one, and 20% may consider one in the future. And then some of you have adopted but are considering amendments. And apologize, this next answer is kind of jumbled and hard to digest, but thank you for your input on different challenges that you're facing. And it looks like most of you have used the Explorer, only 11% have not, and most of you have not used the Explorer's BPS or building data feature for non-residential. So that's really helpful. Thank you. And get the presentation back up here, and we'll chug along.
While you're doing that, I just put a link to the Explorer in the chat so people can go there if they haven't.
All right, so I won't go too much into Explorer background since most of you have used it at least once. But it just reminding everybody it's free for any California city and county, and it's provided by the Codes and Standards program. And just to give you the overview of Explorer's functionality before we dive into the specific functionality today, the Explorer provides cost-effectiveness study data, building data, which we'll be talking about, impact forecasts, provides a policy menu customized for your jurisdiction, and helps you develop virtual policies and even generate documents to help your workflow for adoption. So building data, we have a variety of kinds. We have new construction forecasts for both residential and non-residential. We have residential building stock data for existing buildings. And then what we're here to talk about today, obviously, is the non-residential building stock data. And just to head off some potential confusion, the distinction between residential and non-residential is murky when it comes to whether it includes multifamily, and it changes and it's different in different contexts. So we include multifamily data for multifamily buildings in both the residential building stock and the non-residential building stock area. So there's a bit of overlap, but we think that that's more oriented towards the types of policies that we see jurisdictions making that include multifamily, sometimes with single family policies, and then sometimes with commercial building policies. All right, so our non-residential building stock or BPS data feature, the first version launched in January, and we focused on answering questions like, how many buildings are in my city and how big are they? And how much of my building stock is larger than, say, 20,000 square feet? And we provided building counts, building size, building type. And you can see just on the bottom left of the slide, that's a snapshot of what our control panel for the building BPS feature looks like. And I've highlighted the features that correlate to the very first version. And those are used to generate a chart an interactive chart that Jasmine will be demonstrating shortly. The next feature we launched in June, and this was geared towards getting a deeper dive into your jurisdiction's building stock and starting to get some more color about the distribution of buildings by size and type and age. And so that enabled you to answer questions like, what's the age profile of our office buildings? Or what share of buildings would be covered under a local policy that are not already subject to California's AB 802 requirements? And you can see we added y-axis options like floor area, and then x-axis options as well. And we added the ability to break down by building type, as you can see highlighted in those yellow boxes. And then finally, our most recent version, we added a lot of options to include building energy use, energy intensity, emissions, emissions intensity, as well as breakdowns by fuel type. And with those additions, you can now answer questions like, what share of emissions would be covered in my city, assuming 25,000 square foot minimum size? Or which building types in my city use the most natural gas? And finally, before we jump into the demo, I just want to go over the data sources that we use for this feature. And Jasmine will show you where you can find more information about these in the demo. But the building characteristics data comes from the Department of Energy's city and county commercial buildings inventory produced by NREL. And the site, the energy use intensity data, or the EUI data, comes from a couple different sources depending on the building type. So for apartments, we used the DOE's ResStock tool. And for non-residential building types, we used their Comstock tool. And then for the miscellaneous type known as other, we used AB802 benchmarking data, since that wasn't supported in either of those DOE tools. And we use that EUI data in order to extrapolate emissions and emissions intensity using the EUIs for each of the different fuel types and applying emissions factors that are customizable in our assumptions area. So with that, I will turn it over to Jasmine Kraus for our demo.
Awesome. So let me share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see the Explorer homepage?
Yes.
Perfect. So if you have the screen space and you want to follow along, you can. You can go to explorer.localenergycodes.com. The one thing I will say is I'm going to choose an example jurisdiction to walk us through. So if you are following along with your jurisdiction, the graphs are not going to look the same, and some of the analysis is going to differ, but you can always open it up and get started, and then come back after we've walked through. I'm going to be choosing Thousand Oaks just as a good illustration, but yeah, feel free to follow along at least for the first part on your own. So once you've come to the Explorer homepage, there's a couple different ways that you can get to our BPS feature. One is to go on the sidebar here and go to building estimates. And another way is right here central on the page, we have this benchmarking and BPS card, and you can just open Explore Data here. And then if this is your first time here, or if you've cleared your cache, you'll have to type in your city. So I'm going to type in Thousand Oaks, for example. If you've been here before, it'll pull whatever city you previously had. So you can always just double check that. Okay, so here we are. This is the landing page, the default setup, and you'll see that we're really looking at this first view of the number of buildings right here on the left, going from 0 up to kind of over the maximum in your jurisdiction. And then along the bottom, we have the buildings organized by the individual building size. So these are building square footage bins, and they go from our smallest bin on the right is under 5,000 square feet. And then on the left, we have our largest bin, which is over 100,000 square feet. So that's the basis. And then we have these other cumulative share lines, which are these shaded different colored lines, the purple being emissions and the green being the cumulative buildings. If you previously visited the tool, we had only 2 cumulative share lines before, one of which instead of emissions was floor area. That was being used kind of as a stand-in, and now we have actual energy and emissions data. If these lines are a little busy for you, you can scroll down. You can see all of the available ones here. You can always turn them off, and then you have a really clean graph to look at. So like Eric mentioned, this default view answers one of the most basic questions of how many non-residential buildings do I have and what size are those buildings? And basically, as long as you have the x-axis selected as building size, you are going to have this selector that you can drag and move around along the top of your graph. If you're on another view, you can always also change this in the drop down here. And for example, if I'm looking at this, I see, okay, I have a lot of really small buildings, under 5,000, but also a good amount here, all the way up to about 20,000 where they start to drop off. So maybe I want to try what a 20,000 square foot threshold would look like. And if you'll notice, these 3 different donut charts on the side have updated. So this is saying that, okay, with a threshold of over 20,000 square foot buildings, I'm covering 33% of these non-residential buildings, 82% of my floor area, and 73% of these buildings' emissions. And again, you can always drag and say, okay, what about 30,000? And see how that changes. But for instance, if I set this to 20, which is a pretty common threshold, I could say, oh, I like how this looks. I'm pretty happy with that. I can also toggle on this exclude buildings over 50,000 setting, and that moves this line that was previously aligned with the left side of the graph in, and it cuts out buildings that are already covered by the state's benchmarking policy. So if you want to really just look at what your policy, exclusive of anything the state is doing, would be affecting these buildings, that's how you would do it. Like everything on our site, you can toggle these things on and off. You can change things around. So for this analysis, I'm going to leave it on because I'm curious what my biggest buildings look like as well. So going from here, a natural question after looking at just this number of buildings and their square footage, it's okay, like this is great to get a look at how many buildings would have to comply with my policy, which we can see here would be 334. But what is the actual energy use of these buildings? And this is where I can scroll up, and under the metric y-axis category, this is where we've added a lot of options now, and I can go to energy use. And this is where you see a really big difference, right? Before, okay, we had a lot of small buildings, fewer large buildings, but when we switch over to energy use, you can see that these large buildings are really using a massive amount of energy. You can always hover over these bars to get the numbers. You can also scroll down on the left. Under other controls, you have column totals, which then just pops them to float right above the bars. So another option here is if I'm really curious, okay, I can see that buildings over 100,000 square feet are using a lot of energy, but I'm curious what types of buildings are in this category. I can go over to building type, again in that left scroll bar on the side, and turn that on. And so now under that, you'll see all of the non-residential building types and apartments that we cover, and it's kind of a key for which color corresponds to them on the graph. So for instance here, okay, I can see that in this over 100,000 square foot bar, the light green is pretty prominent. So that's retail buildings. I could look at this kind of brownish tan, and that's offices. And if I went to this teal, this is full service restaurants, which is quite a big chunk of my energy use, and then apartments. You can also unselect building types from this list. So if you know, for example, let's see what would be visible. So like this orange is hospitals. If I think, I don't think we want to cover hospitals for our benchmarking or BPS policy, I can uncheck that. And then it disappears from the graph. All these metrics update. And you'll see that once you've deselected this selected building summary updates. So it's not only confirming your threshold, which I currently have set to 25,000 square feet, but it's also saying that it's including 11 of the 12 building types in this analysis. So if I go and check it back it drops it and it just says there's all building types. And then again, if I remove it, 11 of 12. So this is a great spot to go and just confirm that everything is set up the way you want it to be set up. Another option here is, let me toggle off building type for just a second and then collapse that just so you can see. And we do also have a fuel type control here. So if you toggle this on, you can look at your site energy use by fuel. So here, the solid part of the bar is electricity. This kind of diagonal hatch is natural gas. And then there is a third type that is really hard to see. It's dotted. It's other fuels. So this is district heating and cooling. It's propane and kind of any other miscellaneous fuel use. It's very small for almost all jurisdictions, but it's there. So naturally, also after seeing this fuel type breakdown, you might want to move and look at this on an emissions basis instead. So you can do that again by scrolling up and under this metric y-axis, going to emissions. So again, they look pretty similar. We found that energy and emissions correlate pretty well on most of these charts, which makes sense. But this is a great spot for you to go in and check your assumptions, which is here in the upper right-hand corner of the page. And if you click that, you're going to see 3 assumptions, which are tied to these 3 different fuel types. So these are the adjustable emissions assumptions that Eric talked about. So for instance, here, for my current grid clean electricity share, this is the percentage of grid supplied electricity that we think is generated from renewable or zero emission sources in your jurisdiction. All of these are using just kind of statewide averages right now. But if you know, for instance, that your jurisdiction has a CCA that's providing a lot more clean electricity, not 8%, let me type in 80%. And then this chart will update with your emissions based on this being the emissions factor calculation then for your electricity. So basically what happened was you saw the electricity portion of the bar, that solid blue, get smaller relative. And then you can see that natural gas is the bigger portion of the bar for most of these now. And again, you can always go in and change these. And there's always this little right-hand button on these assumptions where you can restore it to the default value. So you can change things around. You're not going to break anything. Again, that other fuel one that's a little weird, we have a short description here, and you can really customize that based on what the situation is and your jurisdiction with other fuels. So that's about that. So let me turn off fuel type and turn back on building type. And another question that you might have here is, this is a great view, sure, broken down by the building size of emissions by building type, but it kind of breaks it up and makes it hard to see on the building type level across all of these sizes what their emissions look like. So you can get a much clearer picture of that by changing your x-axis category and going to building type. And now you can see emissions just by building type. Again, the selector that was previously along the top has disappeared because we are not on the building size category. You can still change it here in the dropdown, and it's still saved the threshold that you set. So this is a great big picture. You can see, wow, I have a lot of retail buildings that are contributing to my emissions, offices, apartments, and full service restaurants. And this is across all buildings and all sizes based on your selection. So another way of looking at this might be, okay, this is the big picture, but what is the emissions intensity, which we can change the y-axis to. So if you just look at how much a building type is emitting per square foot per year, so removing that piece of, for emissions, it's really looking at also, there we go, the square footage of each building type in your jurisdiction. But if you really want to look at which building type in comparison without that weighting factor, you can do that with emissions intensity. So here you see that, wow, full service restaurants are very carbon intensive. There's another way of looking at some of this data. So if you go, wow, this looks really high, you know, is this correct? You can always scroll down. We have a table down here and a really quick glance at this. So I'm looking at full service restaurants. If I come down and, I have 52 full service restaurants and I can see the emissions intensity here and the floor area and see that, wow, yeah, full service restaurants have a particularly high emissions intensity. These columns on the right are based on your selection. Ooh, reopen that. So based on that we've selected this threshold, it narrows it down a bit, right? So the selected full service restaurants are really just 3 that have an emissions intensity of 19.9, which compared to the other emission intensities here is pretty high. Then another way, from this, I really have questions about, okay, what is the distribution of these full service restaurants look like? I can always go back to this original buildings by building size chart view. And then if I open up building type again, I can click all to deselect. And then if I look at just full service restaurants by just clicking that, this is a really easy view. So I can see that, okay, in this 20 to 25 bin, I have 1 building, 1 in this 30 to 40,000 square foot bin, and then 2 in this really large bin. And again, you can also drag this to see, okay, up here in this highest bin, it's 2 buildings, the floor area, and you can see that 7% of the total emissions. So that's pretty high. And then again, I can always scroll back and see. So let me put all of these back. And then I'll put us back on emissions. So there's another thing I want to point out, which is just 2 of these additional x-axis categories. One is this none, which gives you this aggregate view. Again, you can have building type on, you can have building type off, you could do fuel type on or off as well. And again, the column totals still work here too. The last one is vintage, which we included vintage here because we know that it's a kind of common feeling that vintage would contribute to greenhouse gas intensity and energy use intensity. So we've provided it, but we found that it's not often strongly correlated with either of those factors. So it's here if you want to take a look. Potentially more interesting if you look at buildings and vintage, especially if you wanted to look at, for instance, if I turn this on and just look at apartments, if I want to see, the age of apartments over time or whatnot. Let me put us back here. And then last 2 things I want to point out is we have a data sources link here. This will open an article that walks through all of those different data sources Eric mentioned, and it has a little bit more granular explanations of how we use the data and our methodology. And then I'll point out, like I always do, Intercom is our user support hub. It's in the bottom right corner here. You can open it and you can search for these articles like that one linked here in this top bar. You can send me a message. It'll open up a chat window. I get these and I'll respond. Or you can schedule a walkthrough. So if you run through this on your own and you're really confused or you have a lot of questions, feel free to just schedule a walkthrough. And we can handle those live in person. So yeah, I think that's it from me, and I'll hand it back to Eric.
All right, thanks, Jasmine. I I will open it up to questions, and in the meantime, I will scan the chat to see if there's any questions I can respond to for everybody.
There's one that I can ask here from Taylor. Can assumptions be edited for residential analysis, such as inputting grid clean electric share and emissions factors?
Yes, they can. I assume,
Is
Taylor, that you're talking about a different policy type besides BPS, like a reach code or an existing residential retrofit policy. Yes, you can change the emissions factors for those too. And if you're talking
Awesome.
about a multifamily building BPS policy, yeah, those can be changed as well.
Good to know. Thanks, Eric.
And feel free to schedule a walkthrough via the site with Jasmine. She can do an individual kind of tour of features that are customized more towards what you're trying to do with the tool.
Eric, you answered this in the chat, but I think it's important to repeat. Somebody had asked about the QC on the data and where it comes from, essentially, and I think repeating that is probably beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and let me explain something else. So the data that we're using is not one-to-one tied to actual buildings. This is model data. The source, the base data for the building stock characteristics besides energy is NREL city and county commercial buildings inventory. And that's based on CoStar data, the real estate transaction company, and supplemented with Energy Information Administration's commercial building survey, as well as FEMA building data for more rural areas with less real estate transactions. And that data is all put together by NREL and quality assured, and it it, it sort of models actual building level data, but it is not actual building level data. There's no addresses. So then the energy data comes from a couple different sources, depending on the building type again. So for most, it's either Comstock or ResStock, which are again DOE resources that are quality controlled. And finally, the one building type where we actually use real reported data from buildings, but we take a median, is the other building type, sort of the miscellaneous category.
Excellent. Thank you very much for running through that again. We have a couple of more questions in the chat here. There's one from Scott Farbman asking if there's anything in the tool that actually incorporates cost data.
So for building performance standards, no, we have nothing at this point that for costs. And I assume the question, Scott, is trying to get a sense of what would be the compliance burden for a non-residential building owner to meet a certain performance standard. So no, we don't have that at this point. Of course, in the tool for other policies, there is a lot on cost data for reach codes and time of retrofit, flex path requirements for existing residential and new construction.
Excellent. Okay, and then John McKenna asks about actually one of our newest features here. And he wants to know if one wanted to consider a regional BPS, could one look at the data by county instead of city?
Yeah, great question, John. Yes, and I think that's a good opportunity to kind of highlight a new feature. Jasmine, do you want to put your screen back up and kind of show? This is actually something that we're really excited about, and actually extends the capabilities of the tool a lot.
Awesome. Yeah, so back on the Explorer, and you'll see this from just about any page, is in the sidebar, we have a new addition with this new tag that says Show Me Data for A. And as you see, it's already selected city or county. This is basically the default mode. If you're on here, nothing has changed. The Explorer looks like it always has. If you go down here, you'll see that we've added quite a few different regional entity types. So, for instance, CCAs, COGs, RENs, some air quality and pollution districts, utilities, and the state, or alternatively, if you wanted to look at an entire climate zone, you can do so too. So for example, I can go to REN, and then I can start typing in, for instance, BayREN, and it will load in a second. And basically, the homepage has changed a little bit now. So everything on the original Explorer isn't already fully customized for these other entities. So we've kind of moved some things around to make sure that everything's as usable as possible. But you do still have the building stock data and cost effectiveness study results. If you're ever curious what we're including in one of these entities or regions, you can click this eye icon here. They'll open and clarify the number of jurisdictions, the climate zones, dwelling units, and floor area. You can scroll down. This is the big one, obviously. And we have a short explanation here about we're basically taking all of our individual jurisdiction data and summing it up into these regional entities, just to increase the capabilities. If we're missing a city here, reach out and let us know. I know especially for some of these other entities, sometimes there's new membership or it fluctuates, so just let us know if something's missing or someone's included that shouldn't be. And you'll see that on the normal Explorer, this says summary. Here it just says study list. It'll load in a second. It just shows all of the cost effectiveness studies and their version history. Loading very slowly. Okay, but basically, I'll take a look at what's happening there. There's always something.
Because you're showing it.
Yeah, exactly. But it just lists all the different studies by building type. You can still see building estimates here. This works both for residential and non-residential. So come here. It is a little slower sometimes because it's a larger amount of jurisdictions it's combining together. But same functionality here exists also on the BPS side. The same tables exist. You can still interact with the charts the same way. And you also can still view here on the left study results for this area. So for example, if you wanted to look at the newest existing building study, you can do that. And the same results are here. So yeah, Eric, is there anything else you wanted me to add?
That's really helpful. Thanks, Jasmine. And just to show, can you select San Mateo County and show John how there's the entire county or just the unincorporated area?
Yeah. So
yeah.
Awesome. So also, you don't have to go through here on the left and check the specific entity type. You can also just start typing it up here in the jurisdiction and entity kind of entry area, and it'll still pull up. It's just showing that there aren't RENs that have San Mateo in the name at the top. But then under other entities, you could see, okay, City of San Mateo, the county unincorporated area, and then here you'll see entire county. And so this is the one that we would want if you want the city and the unincorporated area all to be treated as one entity together. And then it'll take a second to load, and then you can go ahead and run with that.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for the question, John. I know there are some other counties that are looking at a regional BPS approach too. So that could be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you both. One other question is there a desire in the future to add cost data to this tool for BPS? And
so we would love to keep adding features. I know there's a lot more to BPS that can be challenging for jurisdictions, and our desire to add features really comes from the needs of jurisdictions. So we really welcome your feedback and thoughts about what would be most helpful. That's way more important than what we want. So I have collated the responses from the survey about what has been the most challenging, and I can flash that on the screen. But would really thank you, Marna, for that vote. And if you have more feedback about what would be helpful next, please feel free to pop it in the chat or contact us. Get that going.
Yeah, I'd like to just even reiterate that. Please let us know what kind of features you think would be most valuable, what you find valuable now. This is all driven by the jurisdiction need and how many jurisdictions are actually using the tool. And so we've got a lot of ideas ourselves, but we really need to know what you guys want and need most. In addition to cost data. Are there any other questions, or before we go back to the survey, were there any other questions? I know we went through all the ones in the chat, but I haven't heard any. I don't see any hands raised. Okay. As Eric goes through this, if you think of other questions, I encourage you to ask them. This is the time to do it. You have everybody here. There's only, there's less than 30 of us in this group here. So if you have a question, chances are good someone else does too. So just please go ahead and ask. This would be a good time for it. And I see Taylor, you have raised your hand.
Thanks, Misty. Yeah, I'm looking at the new feature where you can select a specific CCA. That is super, super cool. Thank you guys for adding that. My question is, when selecting a particular CCA, will that automatically input emissions and clean energy data specific to that CCA, or is that something we would still manually have to edit?
Great question. You would still manually have to edit.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks for letting me know.
A lot to keep up for the whole state.
Yes.
As it changes and everybody changes their mix. I thought I saw another hand come up just for a moment. She changed her mind. No? Okay. Okay, well, let's go ahead and review the survey results and
Sure, yeah. So this was just the responses to the question, what has been the most challenging part of your BPS journey, and really helpful responses here. We can see the highest ones are choosing performance metrics. That's, forecasting impact, understanding emissions. Hopefully this feature will help with that part. Understanding BPS mechanics, understanding the financial burden, which definitely echoes what we're hearing also in the chat and from you guys. And finally, identifying the highest emitters, which is something that this new version we've released should be really helpful with. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, there's our email addresses again, and we look forward to hearing from you with other suggestions or more details.
All righty. Thank you both, Jasmine and Eric. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up for us then, since we don't have any more questions. Just really quickly, we've been focusing on the building stock feature in the tool, but I also wanted to let you know that we have been working on some other features to help you. As you all know, the 2025 Energy Code pretty much now has heat pumps in the base case in new construction for most occupancies. And so it really kind of highlights the opportunities for existing buildings now. They were always there. They were always the bigger opportunity, but of course it's a little bit easier to do new construction policies. But we know now that the big focus is on existing buildings. And so we have significantly expanded some of the tools in the FlexPath and added a checklist of the major development steps as you go through the process. We updated the interface and all kinds of things there. So we've made it a lot easier for you to develop a policy and see the impacts of that policy for single family homes. We also now have downloadable documents that if you are doing a FlexPath ordinance, you'll need a proof of cost effectiveness, and you can download that directly from the Explorer. So we've made it so that you can develop policies there on the FlexPath side as well for single family. And next up, we're going to be adding both the single family and non-residential study results for the AC to heat pump studies. And so those will be added very soon. I know that's kind of next on Jasmine's list. And so you should be seeing those as well. So in the meantime, we have quite a few resources available for you to get started if you'd like. We've got studies that support both the FlexPath for existing single family, or if you'd like if you prefer something to focus on a particular measure, such as cool roofs or something else, you can also use the study to support those kind of ordinances. We also have both the single family and non-residential AC to heat pump studies ready. And we are currently working on a cool roof study. We do have some limited results available now, but we are working on expanding those to statewide. So if you do need that, let me know and I can share those with you. For all of these studies, we've developed a whole bunch of different resources. Some of them we've developed in coordination with PCE and SBCE. Some of them they've developed, and we're all leveraging each other's resources. So there's a whole lot out there to support you in this process. There's model ordinance language, there's sample presentation templates and reports that you can take and make your own. They're intended for you to make your own out of them. There's no branding or anything like that. We assume that you'll take them and brand them yourself, and it at least gives you a place to start so you're not looking at a blank page for some of these things. Several other resources available. We've got a Reach Codes primer if you've never been through the process before. And it explains how the process goes and the major tasks in adopting an ordinance. And then also the FlexPath decision guide. That actually gives you a pretty good step-by-step to go through of all the different steps you need to take to adopt a FlexPath ordinance. There's similar steps for other ordinances too, so I would recommend taking a look at it if you have any questions about that. And lastly, of course, we have these are all on the website, as well as a tracking page for adopted ordinances. One of the things I will say about that page is that we post both the ordinance and the staff report for you, so that if you want to get some context about the meeting and things like that, you can easily do that with the staff report. And then lastly, the Cost Effectiveness Explorer, of course. And I mentioned that they are all available on our local energy codes website. I've got the link here down at the bottom of the page for the resources page. So kind of what can you do now? I think the first step really is to become familiar with your existing building stock. Get to know where are the highest impact opportunities for you. And then, take a look at what some of the recent activity in your jurisdiction, what kinds of things are happening, what kinds of building types are submitting the most kind of permits, and what kinds of activities are they doing. Get just kind of an idea of what the typical activity is. And then kind of start creating and analyzing some possible scenarios. For BPS, you'll need a little bit more information, but you can start looking at some possibilities with the information that you can get from the Explorer, and you can begin that process and start moving down the road. So highly recommend that you take a look at it. And I can't say enough. If you have questions, Jasmine is absolutely wonderful to talk with about these things. She will do a walkthrough with you, and she does a fabulous job on that. So please don't hesitate to contact her or any of us if you have any questions. Thank you very much to everybody for your time.